Today we are working on the 1972 Challenger, and primarily the dash pad. As you can see, this dash pad has seen better days. I've actually gone in and I've torn out most of the stock vinyl that was on here. I've basically been experimenting with my die grinder, trying to dig it out, see how difficult it's going to be, and to see if I'm going to be able to shape it. I'm also looking at doing some modifications, namely the deletion of the 3 speaker holes and then the addition of something else right around here. So we'll go ahead and touch on that when we get there. The immediate goal right now is just to continue on and repairing the dash pad. So as we know, on these stock dash pads, we have a vinyl kind of like outer skin, then we have a foam insert. It's kind of a thick foam insert, and so over time the vinyl will shrink, it'll crack, it'll stretch, and then you'll get like these peaks and valleys here. I've got my ruler just so you can kind of see what we're working with. It kind of just comes up like this, so you can't just sand this down and then paint over it and then call it good. It's just not going to work. And although I have seen some people like kind of sand it down a little bit, put some body filler in here, spray some spray texture down on it, and then kind of let it go, what'll end up happening is that the rest of the vinyl will still continue to shrink. It won't stop shrinking just because you've textured over it. So this right here might be smooth right now, but over time it will continue to shrink and it'll crack again. So you're basically left with a couple options here. The number one option is to just have this thing professionally reskinned. I was actually quoted over $1,000 to get this thing reskinned, and if this was a Concours 100% restoration, I might actually consider doing something like that. But because this is going to be a driver, I'm going to be doing some modifications. I'm going to be doing, like I said, some modifications up here. I don't really want to invest that kind of money, especially when I'm still in the process of changing things up. So the next option is to just fill this whole thing up with body filler, left to right. Just fill it all the way up, sand it down, spray texture it, and then, you know, do that. But like I mentioned before, any kind of vinyl plastic that's still laid here, left over after the fact, is going to continue shrinking, it's going to flake, and whatever you paint over that's not body filler, it's just going to crack and flake off anyway. The second thing is that body filler can only fill in so much of a gap. There are some gaps on this dash that completely exceed the maximum thickness of body filler. So if you use too much body filler and you lay it on too thick, it will crack and you're right back to square one. So I want to think of the solution that gives me the best result but also lasts the longest amount of time. This thing's going to see a lot of sun, it's going to see a lot of hard miles, it won't really be like kind of driven around easily, so it will see a lot of vibrations. The suspension is going to be a little stiffer, so it's going to be subject to a little bit more abuse than the average dash, so we kind of want something that'll probably hold up to the abuse. Another thing is that this thing is missing chunks of the dash already. We can't just body fill over this. We can't just form this with a grip of body filler here in the corners and expect it to hold together. What I do want to do, however, is leave a couple islands here. So I left this guy, this guy, this guy. So that way I kind of have a general idea of what this thing is supposed to look like. These pieces of vinyl were the ones that were the best shape, so I can probably use this as a reference in order to kind of guide the material that I'm going to be laying up on top. And in fact, we're going to be doing kind of a mix of spray foam, body filler, and fiberglass mesh. So the fiberglass is going to provide a skin that we're going to lay over all of this, and that's going to contain everything that's under here. The spray foam is going to be the support system that goes underneath, that gives it the general shape, and the body filler will sit above the fiberglass mat, and that's just going to fill in any kind of imperfections. But with the foam and fiberglass, I should be able to build this back up, kind of tape off and trim off as needed, and then go over it with fiberglass and then redo the whole thing. And hopefully the end result will be that it looks as close to original as possible. All right, so I've got pretty much all the cracks out. I've already removed the VIN plate. I've cleaned up this corner right here. I just have to remove a little bit of vinyl around here, just this stuff that's loose. I tried to clean up this little corner here, but it was all loose, so I just had to rip it all out. Same with over here. It actually looked like it was in really good shape, but this whole area right here had lifted and it was all loose, so I just went through and I buzzed right through all of this. So this will have to get redone. Took some bites out of crime right here, and there's a little bit of damage here, but I might be able to get away with it. If not, I'll clean it up. And then I went ahead and I cut out what I had showed you guys earlier. This here where the little Challenger logo goes, this little corner, and then all of this. I also went through and I cut off the back side where the vinyl used to overlap. And I still have to take off all the rust so the new stuff will stick, but the vinyl used to wrap around this side and it went all the way across. But most of this vinyl wasn't even stuck. Like you could see that this is one of the pieces that used to be here. And if I flip it around, it's full of rust. So this stuff was just dangling here for the longest time. I really just picked out a corner and just lifted it up and the whole thing just came out. Like I didn't even have to struggle. I thought I was gonna have to sand all this, but the only sanding I'm gonna have to do is the sheet metal just so the new stuff kind of has somewhere to go. I've got the frame currently attached to the base because I didn't want excessive movement, but I have to repair this little screw hole that's right here. So I've got to go ahead and pull this off. I've already dug out a big old hole on the other side where the screw's gonna come out of. I'll put in a new bolt and then weld it. While I'm welding, I'll go ahead and weld up the speaker holes that I talked about earlier. And while we're at it, we're gonna go ahead and mock up this. So I've got a couple of these 3-gauge pods. They're all a little bit different, but I want to incorporate one of these and actually stick it somewhere in the dash. I'm thinking about something like this, so that way when I'm driving, I'm able to look at, you know, a couple extra gauges aside from the ones that are down there. I'm thinking about adding my wideband, a boost gauge, and an oil temperature gauge. And I could easily permanently mount it by just screwing this into the base and then running my foam and fiberglass over this while trying to keep this nice and clear. If I wanted to just eliminate this line right here, I could just dig out a little bit further and then run this out to the very edge, but it might look a little bit cleaner if I either keep it back here or have it rest on top of the fiberglass instead. I haven't quite decided what I'm gonna do about this, but what I do wanna make sure is that I have access to the gauges after it's all assembled. So my hand has to be able to fit in here, and then I've gotta be able to reach the gauges so I can uninstall and reinstall the gauges whenever I need to service them, or actually when I'm even assembling them, I need access. So I need to decide whether or not this is going to be removable or not. What I've got to do now is separate the top dash pad from the bottom frame. That way I can go ahead and get this welded up along with all the other holes. So let's go ahead and do that. But you can see that we've got a bunch of little studs here, 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 there, and then I have a broken one right there which I just removed. So I have a bolt, I think it's a number 10 screw. So I've got like a grade 5 number 10 screw here that's basically the same thread pitch as the frame, and that's about the same height, so it should be fine. This thing just comes in from the top and then fits in this hole right there. So on the top, I ripped out the foam to get to it, and then I gotta still sand it a little bit more. This will drop in here, right there, and then now that it's in place, I'll probably hit it with my TIG welder and then TIG weld around it, just so I can have this thing permanently set right there and I won't have to worry about it when I put the foam over it. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. I just got done repairing it, and let me tell you that it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I'll flip it over right now so you can see the backside, but I ended up TIG welding a new bolt onto here, but I had to do it twice. So I put it in the right spot, I welded everything looked good, and then I realized that the metal was so thin it started to burn through immediately, and so then I welded the nut onto the backside of this metal frame, and then when I tried to take it off, I broke the stud off again. So I had to do it again. I had to drill out the head that I just welded on, but this time I added a washer and then I put the nut on it. So the washer got stuck just like the nut did, but because the washer was protecting the new nut, I was able to get it off no problem. So let me go ahead and flip it on the other side so you guys can see what it looks like. And it's not very pretty, but it gives you kind of an idea of what it looks like now. And I did it with my TIG torch because I didn't want to add a whole bunch of filler, and I didn't want to apply as much heat as there would have been if I would have used a MIG or a flux core welder. But you can definitely do it with a MIG or a flux core, but as you can see from the heat itself, I already torched all the surrounding foam, so I'm gonna have to go through and hit it with the die grinder again because the new foam's not gonna stick to that. I also started to clean up the speaker holes because we are going to plug them. We got this one and then we got this one on the other side. I'm just gonna cut out a piece of sheet metal, overlay it, and then we're gonna lap weld it in. Basically, it's just a backing so that way the foam has somewhere to sit on the opposite side. The nice thing about this though is that if I ever do decide to install speakers again, I could just re-drill some holes, go through the foam and everything, and because I'll have a clean slate here, I'll be able to install whatever kind of speaker I want to. I won't necessarily be stuck with any specific design or cover. I'll be able to do basically whatever I want. To cover up these speaker holes, this is what I came up with. I've made 2 of these little plates that'll take the place of a big hole right there, and then I've got one on the other side. I then drilled out 1 hole on each corner, and then I'm going to spot weld them in place. If I jump over to the other side, I've already done 1 of them, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 spot welds, and it's completely flush to the top side of the dash. Flipping the dash over, you can tell what's going on here. It's pretty much flush all the way here. Wherever the spot welds burn through, I have to cut out this foam and then fill it in with new foam. So this one's an obvious one here. This one not so much because I already burned this area earlier. I've got 1 area right here and then 1 right there. You can't really tell again because it's under all the foam, but I know I burned all the way through, so I am going to cut out a little section of foam here just to make sure that it doesn't come up and peel off later on. I haven't welded in the plate for the other side, so I'm going to do that next. So before I get started on the last bit of trimming, there's 1 more patch panel I've got to weld in, and that one's going to be here by the old speaker hole. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a 3-gauge pod that we're planning on sticking somewhere around here. I'm still not quite sure how I'm going to do this, if I'm going to leave it a little bit further back or actually kick it further forward, but the end result is going to be pretty much the same. And in order to shape the foam a little bit better, I need to go ahead and close this off before I mount this to this. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out another piece of cardboard into this shape, and then cut out another piece of steel, and then we'll go ahead and weld that in. For those of you wondering, I started off with a quick piece of cardboard to give me a general idea of what I was looking for, and then figured out its orientation. I needed to make sure that it was at least to this length. That way when I put the 3-gauge pod, the plate that I install would be large enough that it covers the hole, but small enough that it doesn't block any access to the pod itself. After I finished up the cardboard template, I matched it up to a piece of steel like this one, and then I went ahead and cut this guy out, and then I just shaped it and fine-tuned it until I got it to the point where I'm happy with it, which is right around right here. The flange on this one is really small except for maybe the point. So instead of trying to spot weld this one, I'm just going to lap weld it, 1 on each corner and then maybe 2 more in the middle of that just to keep it from moving. But I'm not going to do much more than that. Fast forward and I got it all welded in. I got 1 spot weld in the tip because there was a little bit of a flange, as you can see, where I could go ahead and do a spot weld. And then I did a couple tack welds on each side, more or less evenly spaced out. The metal was really corroded here, so as soon as I started welding, it poked through. But if I wanted to, I could fill this in, but I don't think I'm gonna have to. There's a couple more holes like this one and this one that are gonna get covered anyway, along with this one that's over here. So a little hole like this one I'm not too concerned about. Fitting the 3-gauge pod back on here, you guys can see how the plate just covered up this entire section. I don't have anything interfering here. The sheet metal on this side is a little bit in the way, but depending on how I orientate these gauges, this little piece right here might be fine. All the wires are going to be traveling that way anyway, so depending if I need a vacuum line or a couple wires coming out of here, I don't think it should be that much of a hassle compared to what I was looking at over here. Now that we're done with that, we got to kind of figure out what we're going to do here. There's actually a couple curves that are compounded here, so it actually curves up, then it hits this bevel, then it goes straight, and then it hits another corner here, and then it changes direction again and goes that way. So I could either set up the gauge pod at the top of this corner or at the bottom here before the bevel. And I'm thinking, because originally the foam was shaped in a way that the line actually went across through here and then it dipped because there was some damage here, and then it came back up and then it continued that way. So if I get rid of this entire line, I could bring the gauge all the way up to this corner right here and then blend the bottom of the flange to the vinyl that we have here. So I think that's what we're going to do. After a little bit of trimming, we got everything down to this line right here. If we go ahead and grab the 3-gauge pod and line it back up, we should be able to blend this and it should look pretty good. On this corner right here, I'll have to probably space it up with maybe a couple washers before I bolt it down. But for the most part, I think we should be good. If we compare to this side, this side's already kind of where it's supposed to be, so I'm not gonna worry about this. After trimming this, I noticed that this section right here is way too far down. It must have been the remnants of the damage that we were looking at earlier. So you can see that this body line comes this way, it goes here, and then there's a crack right there, and then it sinks immediately down. So we've got to cut this vinyl out so we can carry this line completely over that way and then blend it around the 3-gauge pot. All right, now that we've pretty much got all the trimming, I've already exposed all these holes that we mentioned earlier. It's pretty much ready for foam, except that we still need to mount this guy. So what I did is I trimmed a little bit more around this corner where it was kind of budding, and I needed to make room for this guy, so I trimmed a little bit more of this edge right there, and now I can go ahead and push this all the way to the right and then forward, and now we get this corner to meet up right there with the bevel. And we don't have a bevel here, but we can assume the bevel is going to be around right there. And then if we look at the front, it's pretty much matched up all the way across. So if we can go ahead and bolt this down right around there, that should be fine. I've already marked down a couple of spots right there with a marker where we're going to drill some holes into this cover. And once I drill the holes in the pot, I'll transfer those holes to the sheet metal, and then we'll drill through the sheet metal, and then we'll be able to bolt this guy to this guy. And once that's done, it's time for foam. Okay, so I got all the screws in, and I ended up using just a regular number 10 screws out of this box, and then we're using lock nuts out of this box, number 10, with a couple washers underneath. Let me show you what it looks like up on top. This is basically where we're at with the dash. Honestly, it looks worse now than it did when we first started, but I'm pretty sure we're heading in the right direction, but we will end up finding out, won't we? As you can see, this thing is using almost all the bolt holes except for this one and that one. I just decided not to worry about this one at all. I ended up adding the second one here, so I think we should be good to go. Now, before we add the foam, I want to bolt this back onto the frame, and the reason for that is I have some edges, particularly on the sides, like right here, where I'm worried about how the foam and the fiberglass is going to interact with the frame, and I don't want to add foam and fiberglass if the metal frame is going to be in the way. So now I've got to be very careful because I've got this little plastic thing. I'm probably going to put some masking tape somewhere around here, maybe about a ½ inch up, and then just mask this entire area because we're not going to be putting any foam on here. But when it's time to do the fiberglass, I am going to wrap it around here just to have everything tied in, but I'm not going to do any kind of fiberglass on the face, only maybe right here on the bottom, just to tie these two together, and then just a little bit of trimming. But this face right here is going to stay basically exactly the same along with the face in here. So all of that should have some sort of masking tape so I don't accidentally put resin. I don't have to sand it, paint it, because this is now permanent to this. And if I mess it up before I finish it, I'm gonna have to rip it all apart, install a new one, and then kind of start over. So let's go ahead and bolt this guy to the dash frame and go from there. I've got most of the frame back on, and the bolts for the 3-gauge pod clear almost everything except for this corner right there. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take the grinder. I've got to move in probably a ½ inch or so. So that's how much I'm gonna go ahead and cut off of here. That way it'll just be all built in. I might go ahead and trim the top of this. It might get in the way later, so I'll trim maybe the top of this and then a section of the frame right here. And with that, I should be able to finish bolting down the frame. As for the rest of the dash assembly, we're gonna be installing this direct fit plastic kit. This kit is specifically designed for the 1970 to 74 E-body Challenger and Barracudas or Cudas. And then for the 3-gauge pod, we've got 3 gauges right here. We've got a wideband air fuel ratio 4970, oil temperature gauge, not to be confused with the oil pressure gauge. Number for that is 4956. And then we've got a boost only gauge 4904. Also available is a boost boost vacuum gauge, which has the first couple numbers actually reading vacuum from the engine and the rest of it reading boost. But I picked this one because it was easier to read. We're gonna be sitting right around 20 psi plus or minus 5, so it'll be much easier to read this than it will be the smaller scale that sits about this big. So I'm really excited to see these guys installed once I'm all done with this. Okay, so I went ahead and I assembled the complete dash. So we've got the gauge bezel, the aftermarket gauge bezel that we're supposed to be using. We've got the light block off plate because we're not using the factory backlights. I've also got one of the side covers that came with the kit. And then I have a situation with this one that it won't quite sit right. It's all tweaked and it's got some extra stuff that's not required, and it doesn't sit all the way up. So I've got to find a solution for this one, probably modify the frame and trim some of this plastic because it's actually lifted up a little bit. So now it's basically time to fit all these plastics, and I'd rather do it now than try to worry about later, because if I can fit it now, if I have any kind of gaps, like for example this one right there, where it's nice and tight over here but very loose out here, and there's nothing that I can do to close this, I can extend the fiberglass out. And I'm making notes as I'm adjusting everything so I know where to add fiberglass and where to take it away. In fact, on the inside here, I've got myself some arrows and some lines, and I'm giving myself a little bit of guidance because when it's time to put the foam in, I won't have these in here anymore because I don't want them to get damaged. So the better I adjust everything now, the less work I'm gonna have to do in the future. Same thing over here. I could just go ahead and wrap it exactly where it's at, and so long as I don't go beyond the metal frame, I should be fine right here. I'm also finding out that I'm missing a lot of hardware, like for example the speed nut and the bolt that go here, a little bit of hardware on the other side, and some nuts and bolts that I need to put this guy on, because I'm gonna need to figure that out one way or another. That's gonna look really bad unless I fix this. So that's what I'm gonna work on first. Okay, I've got all the plastics pretty much on where they're supposed to be. I've got one screw here. This whole panel's perfectly installed right there. 2 screws down here. These are the factory screw holes, so nothing too crazy here. This top panel, I shaved it right here in this corner. So now these two sit flush, and then I shaved it a little bit on that corner, and now this sits flush, and now the panel is perfectly installed with all the screws except for one, because this one doesn't line up at all to where the speed nut goes. So I'm gonna drill through and mark it and see where we end up on the other side, and if I have to either adjust the speed nut, I will, or if this hole has to be moved to a different spot, then I'll do so. But I've only got the 5 bolts in here and it's all pretty tight, so I'm fairly happy with the way this turned out. This guy's perfectly installed. I cut a relief cut right there so I could get this thing to turn, and then I shaved off a little bit of plastic here so that way this could sit a little bit more flush. I then just ran this screw all the way through with the nut, but I'm probably going to find a way to install a speed nut on that side. I had to shave off a little bit more foam right there, and then I've added some more marks to indicate where the new foam's gonna go. And then this last one was a little bit difficult. I had to do some trimming right here on this little section right there, and then I had to add a hole here on the bottom. I ended up breaking one of the nubs off because the pre-drilled holes that were in here were too small. As soon as it saw any kind of resistance, the whole thing just came apart. So I pre-drilled these holes a little bit bigger, so now the screws actually fit in without stressing the stubs too much. So the last thing that I did was I actually had to enlarge these holes, move them up a little bit higher. That way I can get this piece over this right here, because it was sitting on top of here and there was no way for this plastic to bolt anywhere. So now that I've got it a little bit further up, I can sit it right below here, and now with this hole that's right here, that'll line up to that one that's right there, and I'll be able to install a speed nut on the opposite side and then a screw, and we should be good to go there. Then I'll just install the 2 screws up here that are remaining, and then we're all good. So I'm pretty much happy with the way the plastics are set up. Let's go ahead and pull the plastics back off, and finally we're gonna start on the foam. Okay, I've kind of set the dashboard up in a way so that it's precariously almost tipping over, but it gives me enough room that I can apply the foam without having to move the dash at all. So I've already shook it a little bit and it should be fine. I'm hoping that it doesn't fall over. After the foam is all set up, we're gonna have to sand it. So let me show you the foam that we're gonna use. I've actually seen these guys use this type of spray foam. It's mainly for insulation on houses. I've used this stuff personally on my house to block like drafts and holes and things like that, and it works for that. But whether or not it's going to work on the dash, I don't have any experience. But I have met several people who have used this and they said it works. But really, we're just using it as a backing for the fiberglass. We're not really relying on this to give me the final finish, so I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to be a little easy on the nozzle because I really don't want it to poof out any kind of excessive amount. And I'm trying to get it as close to the metal as possible, so I make sure that it bonds properly. This is going to take a while, so I'll fast forward to the next part. This is the end result after all the foam has been kind of laid out in there, and it looks like just a bunch of hot garbage. So I'm going to give it the recommended 8 hours to cure before we start trimming some of this foam out of here. But in the meantime, I'm just going to leave it alone. If you start messing with it, you could rip it off where it's trying to bond to. So I'd rather just leave it alone and let it do its things. There's a couple voids that are here and there, but I won't be able to get to them until after I shave it down and see where we're at. If the holes are too serious, I could go back and add more foam. But if the holes are just, just divots here and there, then when I install the fiberglass mat and the resin, I should be able to fill all that in all at once. And I've already double checked, and this spray foam should not react adversely to the resin that's going to go on top of here. So I should have no problems with laying the fiberglass right over the shaved foam. It's been about an hour or so, and I've already started shaving some of it off. Not all of it is cured, but it's a pretty warm day today, so it's going pretty quickly. There's some areas, like all these deeper areas where my finger still kind of pushes down. That's still not ready, but then there's areas where it doesn't really deform at all. And in fact, some other areas that are pretty hard, those are 100% ready to get trimmed. Obviously, the longer you wait, the better. For example, this one was one of the first ones that was completely done, hard to the touch and everything, and I just went through, gently shaved it, and I gave myself a nice clean line right here. These ones over here were not quite ready. The foam was kind of moving around a little bit, and so it rips some of the stuff from here. So I'm letting it cure a little bit more and kind of just poking around to see where I can go next, because I'm getting kind of anxious and I want to start getting a lot of this stuff done. So I'm going to take this in baby steps and just do it as best as I can. And as the foam gets harder and harder, I'll be able to cut more and more of it off. So I'm just keeping on right now. You can kind of start seeing everything kind of take shape. I'm purposefully just knocking out the thin areas first because I need a general idea of where we're going, because when I start taking out the really thick stuff, you guys got to remember this is a giant hole, so I've got to make sure that I start from an area where I know the maximum distance is supposed to be, so that way I can kind of start making my cuts around it and I don't end up digging like a big old hole here in the middle and then have to go back and try to fix it. Same thing for the speaker hole here, the other speaker hole there, but overall, aside from like all the little trash and stuff, it's starting to come together. Once everything's all done, I'm either going to try to hit it with like a big cheese grater blade or some sandpaper to try to knock off all the extra stuff, but it's still, not quite 100% cured anyway. So for the time being, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm just knocking out areas like really thin veins. This is where I know that the foam has cured enough for me to be able to cut through it. That way I can start making some progress toward the bigger parts. If you're wondering what tool I'm using to shave this down right now, I'm just using a basic serrated blade. You can pick these up pretty much at any hardware store. This one's kind of a little bit more coarse than I'd like it to be. I found that the finer teeth actually make it easier and provide cleaner cuts on the foam, but I don't have longer, thinner blades, so I'm gonna have to just kind of deal with this. I've already shaved off the first part of the foam and it came out pretty good. There's a few low spots here and here and here, and all the areas where it was like really, really thick. I had a lot of issues with that, and it was probably my fault because I wasn't able to let it cure properly, and so as I was cutting through it, it would rip out sections of it and leave a bunch of holes. Everywhere else though, I'm actually pretty happy with the way it's looking. I gave this a quick sand right here. I gave it another quick sand right there, and you can see that it's going to come out pretty good. I want it as level as possible, and I want to be able to sand in all the little curves that are in the original vinyl. So this time I'm actually going to let it fully cure before we move on to the next step. It's been a couple hours and this is already done curing. I went ahead and I started sanding down the areas that I did first, just so I can give myself kind of a level, just to give myself a little bit better idea of how much foam I'm going to trim off the new foam. As you can see, it's more or less even. I still have to go ahead and hit it with something else. I've just been doing it by hand with my 80 grit sanding disc. And it actually shapes pretty easy, and a little too easy, because as you can see, maybe a little bit right here, there's a little bit of a hole up here on this side. I was trying to leave this line intact and I ended up missing, so there's a little hole right around right here, so I'm going to need to fill that in with fiberglass. The foam isn't like body filler. If there's a little bit of a gap, you can't really use the foam to try to patch that up. You need a minimum thickness, usually probably around this thick, for the foam to actually work. I try to touch up a spot right here and you can see how large the piece is of the foam. So I'll fix all the imperfections as I'm laying down the fiberglass mat. You can see that there was a body line here, and I tried to save this as much as possible. So for that, I just grabbed that same sanding disc and I kind of dug into it a little bit like this, kind of like a saw, and then kind of turned it and then dug it that way. That way I can try to give it a general idea of what it's supposed to look like. So that way I don't lose it when it's time to lay down the fiberglass mat. The fiberglass will kind of diminish the curve a little bit, but it'll still kind of be there. And I still have to carry that line from here out to the gauge pod. All right, it's the next day. I had to let the foam completely cure. I went ahead and I filled in a couple more spots with high density foam that I happened to find at the hardware store. So we had that big gap one, and then I found this high density one, and it seems to be a little bit tighter, a lot less air bubbles, seems to be a little bit stiffer too compared to the other stuff. You can see the old stuff right there and the new stuff right here, and it shapes a lot better, but it took a lot longer to cure, so I had to wait until the next day. Everything is all shaped in. I got the general shape as close as I could with my serrated blades, and then I hit it with the DA just kind of all over the place to try to smooth out all the hard spots and try to bring a little bit more shape to all this stuff. I had to shape all these corners by hand with a little bit of sandpaper, and then just kind of go slow and try to get a general idea for the shape that you're trying to mimic. From here on out, most of the imperfections are going to be taken care of by the fiberglass, so you just need to get it like 80%, 90% there, and then the rest of it is going to be one layer of fiberglass. Once I get one layer of fiberglass on there, I'll do the final trim and fit, and if that's all good, then I'll do one final layer of fiberglass, and then we'll move on to the final steps. But it is, in fact, starting to take quite a bit of shape. The 3 speaker holes were probably the hardest parts to fill back in because it was just so much foam and it was just so deep. And then the corners were not too difficult to fill back in. If you guys remember, we had some broken pieces here. Just used a little bit of masking tape to kind of form it up, and then I just filled in the gap and then went a little bit underneath. And I added a little bit of extra foam on here, so that way when I go to fit it onto the car, I can trim off as much as I need to get it as close to the tight fit or as close to original as possible. So now I'm gonna go ahead and wipe this all down with like a damp cloth, maybe even air it off a little bit, and then we're gonna start laying down some resin and some fiberglass. I just finished up the majority of the first layer, and I say majority because there are some areas, like for example the far edge, that I just wasn't able to get to. There's not a really good way to set this guy up, and I don't have enough stands to kind of leave the edges hanging, so that way I can put the fiberglass underneath. But I don't think that's such a big issue. What I'll do is I'll trim back the stuff that I've already installed, and then I'll wrap another sheet from the bottom to top and just go over everything once I'm all done. The edge is actually kind of important because this is what fits up against the rest of the car. So I don't mind taking a little bit more time to make sure that's addressed properly. Everything else seemed to come out pretty good though. I was able to get most of this into its proper shape. I did get a little bit of delaminating like right around here and this whole area right there. So as soon as this cures, what I'll do is I'll go in and sand some of this out, all the loose fiberglass out. If I leave it here, nothing bad will happen, but the body line will disappear. So I want to make sure that all of my lines are there before I drop the next layer of fiberglass on top. Same thing over here, everything looks good. I've got a lot of extra fiberglass here on the ends. Whatever is loose, I'm just gonna trim off, hit it with my die grinder, just get rid of it, and then we'll probably flip it upside down and then do the bottom side. I got as far as I could, about down here or so, right there, and then I wrapped around a little bit, not too much, around this side. I'll have to go back once the resin finished drying. I'm gonna have to sand this down flush and then hit it with resin and fiberglass all on this side, and just start using a lot smaller pieces to get this done. This whole area right here will have to get removed, and I think this all comes down to me using pieces that were just too big. I was trying to do this as fast as possible, so I split this up into 2 sections because that's how the sheets came. And so I started from one end of the 3-gauge pod back, and then the next sheet I started at the end of that. You can see where the line is, and then I just ran that all the way to the end. The second sheet was not too bad, but probably because it was a much smaller sheet, and then this one just had way too much detail. So what I've got to do now is actually run to the hardware store. I only bought a quart, and I used up the entire quart for this one layer, and I didn't even really lose that much resin as I was pouring it. I was actually very careful. I lost a little bit, like right there, and a couple spots on the ends, but really there was not a lot of waste. All the resin that I poured on here, I saturated everything first, laid the mat down, and then saturated the top of the mat, and everything seemed to work pretty much as intentioned. This was my first time doing stuff with fiberglass, so I was not exactly sure what I was going for, but as I've traveled from one side of the dash to the other side of the dash, I'm starting to get better at it. And so after I sand it, prep it, and get it ready for the next layer, I'm going to be able to accomplish that one a lot easier. But before I get to that second layer, I'm going to flip it, finish this bottom section, let it cure. I think it's like overnight or 24 hours or something like that, and then I can go in and properly sand it, get all the curves right, and do all of that before I put in the final layer. If it looks fine with just this one layer, I'm just gonna leave it like that. I'm not even gonna bother to install a second layer, but it all depends on what it looks like. I don't mind doing like a little bit of spots repairs with the fiberglass. I could always sand it out, put the little piece of fiberglass in there, and then resin that back in, wait a day, and then sand it all smooth. So the only thing I want to make sure is that when I give everything a once over and I sand it, I don't sand through the fiberglass and end up right back on the dash, because then we kind of just wasted that entire time. So we want to make sure that there's at least some sort of layer of fiberglass between the dash and the top where the paint's gonna go. It is now the next day, so let's go ahead and give this thing a quick sand and see what we're working with. I hit everything with the DA sander, and you can see there's a couple of shiny spots here and there, honestly all over the place, but that's basically all the low spots where the sander just can't reach it. And so I can either fill these in with like a fiberglass body filler, or I could go back in and touch it up with resin. I've already done a whole layer of resin right along this top, and honestly I should have laid some across here and there as well, so that way I could get rid of all this veiny texture that's right here. But honestly, I might just leave it. I'm kind of running out of time, and I really need to put the dash back into the car soon. There's also a couple holes that ended up popping up, primarily this big one right here, this one right there, this one right there, and just a couple other areas. This part right here, this whole thing right here is a low spot. And so I have a choice now to either lay down some more resin, touch up some spots, wait another 8 hours for it to cure, then come back in and sand it, or just do everything with body filler. And honestly, I might just go ahead and just do it with body filler. The thing is though, that there's a lot of delamination, especially around these corners, where just adding body filler is not going to make this go away, and I'm gonna have to trim this back again, just like I did with the other side, add in fiberglass, and then build it back up. Whether I decide to do it now or do it later is the question, but doing it later is going to be much more difficult, because once there's paint on here, you're going to have to be very careful to strip all that paint back off before you lay down some more resin. After sanding down the resin, the surface was actually pretty good. There's only a couple divots here and there, so I gave everything kind of a skim coat of body filler. That way I could just kind of sand a little bit of everything, and hopefully I can keep all those holes in check. I also added a little bit of body filler around here. That way I can shape it. Also a little bit back here for the same reason, so that way I can shape it. I don't think I need to add any more body filler down here at the bottom of the gauge. It seems to be pretty full. After I finish sanding and prime everything, I'm gonna spot check a couple things, and if something looks a little out of place, I'll use some spot putty, and then that should take care of any kind of imperfections from here on out. There's some spots like this and underneath, like over here, that I should actually take care of, but because I'm detailing the entire top, I can't really go underneath and do the bottom, so I might have to just kind of go in and do it by hand instead of trying to use a spreader and all that. Chances are that's going to be after I finish the entire top. I also already did the bottom on this side though, and that came out pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. I did kind of clean up the edges, but since I don't know if the new bezels are going to fit as is, I'm just going to have to leave it alone for now, and then when I get the bezels, I'll have to go in and hit it with the die grinder, clean it up a little bit so that way they can fit into place. But overall, it's been a long process, but it's kind of starting to come together. The first coat of body filler already dried up. Everything looks good. I hit it with 80 grit just to get the general shape, and then I hit it with 150 just to soften up the edges a little bit. But what I'm really doing is trying to get the fit up of the plastics as tight as possible. There was already some big gaps between this one and the one over there. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I need to get these gaps under control. So I'm just gonna do it with body filler. The hole isn't really that big and I'll be able to soften it up. It looks like the gap is already pretty close back here, so I could just round this edge off, and then as I get to about right here or so, I can add in more body filler until I get around here, and then fill in this gap right here. On this side, I've got too much material, so I'm going to have to trim this one back a little bit. So I'll probably trim it back first and then create an imaginary line from here to here and then from here to there to try to get these gaps in. Looking at the other plastic, I do have another situation where I've got too much material here at the peak, so I can go ahead and knock this back a little bit more. I'm trying to actually continue this line all the way across, so it's actually pretty easy to tell where we're going to cut this, and then I'm going to add material and blend it to get the gap in here as well. There's also some spots that were uncovered that didn't quite get enough body filler, so we're going to go in and clear these up too. We also have another gap to take care of right here, but this one's also not too bad. Lastly, I've got this plastic to install as well. I ended up backfilling the dash pad with foam, so I'm going to need to notch this out a little bit, so that way the little leg on the panel has somewhere to tuck into, and I can get this a little bit closer to where it's supposed to screw on. The opposite side is actually in pretty good shape. I already kind of trimmed it a little bit. What I'll do is I'll probably take my marker and then just highlight it a little bit more, and then with a little bit of sandpaper, I'll just blend the edge. Once I take care of that, I'm sure I'm gonna have to do a little bit of body filler to feather this edge right here. But what I might do is just trim the plastic and have it sit on top. So depending on what it looks like when I get to this point, I'll decide. All right, I've trimmed off the excess. This one's pretty darn close to where it's going to be, so I'm not going to really work it. I just have to bevel it out and clean it up. But on this side, I've got to go ahead and put in the body filler. I'm going to leave the panel on here because I need to know more or less where we're going to need the body filler. So I'm going to lay the body filler right up against this edge here, and then once the body filler starts to set up, we're going to remove the panel and then bevel the edge on here, and that's how we're going to complete this side. We're basically going to do the same thing here, just fill in the excess, fill in all the areas that need attention, and then we're going to take it off and then finish beveling it down, sanding it down, make it look pretty. For the third panel, I've already clearanced out the edges, so I was able to scoot this all the way to one side where it's supposed to go, lines up with the holes here, here, and there, and then because of that, it ended up falling into the crevice right here. I just had to clean it up a little bit, so this is all good to go. The only place I'm going to add body filler is right here where you see these insane gaps. There's no gap here, big gap here, then there's no gap here. I'm just going to do a little bit of body filler from this corner all the way to the other corner just to kind of soften up the edge, and then I'll blend it into the sheet metal so that way when I install this guy, it'll have a nice clean line between here and here. The dash is upside down, so a lot of this you won't even see, but this particular one I think you will see, so I'm going to pay extra attention to this right here. All right, I just got sanding this. There's still a couple spots left, like adding a little bit of material there and then a little bit right here to kind of clear things up a little bit. I've already sanded this down and fit it, so now there's absolutely no gap between here and here, and then this is what this side kind of looks like with no gap. And then I've got to add a little bit of material here just so it tucks in under there on that side. On the left side of this, I've got to round this right here, and then this corner I've got to sand probably with my finger just to try to take off all the rough edges. And then I might need a little bit right there to fill it in because it looks like it's a little low. If we climb up on top, I've got pretty much the edge that I want. I'm using 60 grit again, so the edges are a little bit jagged. But if we go ahead and grab the plastic that we're going to use, it should sit like around like this or so. And you can see even beyond the tape, I've got more or less the edge that we're kind of looking for. After I soften off the edges a little bit, this whole corner should come out pretty good. I've also filled in a few spots there that we're missing, and then the spot that we talked about earlier, which is right here, went ahead and filled that in as well. All right, after all this sanding, we got a little bit of primer on here. Basically, I'm using a primer that's compatible with body filler, fiberglass, and metal, because we have a little bit of everything in here. So this is what I ended up using. I used the Rust-Oleum automotive primer, and it says fiberglass and metal. Because we know that body filler has some of that fiberglass resin already in it, it should be compatible with fiberglass. In addition to the fiberglass mat that we've already put in here, the additional fiberglass resin that we have in here, and any kind of metal on the edges on the outside, it should be compatible with all of that. On top of that, we're spraying some of this. This is like a truck liner. In fact, let me show you the bottle. So for this, I'm using, same thing, Rust-Oleum truck bed coating. The reason I used this one in particular was because the other one was a rubberized coating, and I didn't want a rubberized coating. I wanted kind of a hard finish, and this says durable, non-skid, impact, scratch resistant. So I'm not really looking for the scratch resistance. I just don't want it to get sticky. And when something is rubberized, it tends to be sticky. When I went to the hardware store to go pick up more primer, I decided to try out this right here, and it actually looks pretty decent. There are obviously some signs of details that need to be addressed, but you know, I'm losing a lot of patience here, and I need to get this dash done as soon as possible. So I'm not going to end up at an A+ job. After all, this is my first time doing it, but I really need to get this, you know, somewhat presentable so it looks good from like 5 feet away, and that's what I'm doing. But the reason I ended up using the Rust-Oleum brand was because the primer is also a Rust-Oleum brand. What has happened in the past is that I've mixed and matched primers and top coats, and sometimes they're not compatible, and I'll spray the top coat and the primer starts to lift or whatever. In an auto body application, you can probably get away with that by using like a primer sealer, and then you would top coat over the sealer. But we're just using rattle cans here because I don't really want to close everything off, turn on my air compressor, and do all that stuff. I'm trying to just keep it with like regular hand tools. From here on, that way, it's pretty much done. I'm not even going to worry about it. It's painted. It's good to go. I'm moving on to the rest of this. If I get any kind of overspray like I'm doing here, when I go ahead and do the top coat on this one, I'll just blend it a little bit and then give everything a once over. So I'm not too concerned with the overspray. I kind of wanted to see what it looked like with all the little imperfections and how good it looked from a couple of feet away, and it's passable. From the front of the car, it's kind of going to look like this, and I think it's going to look great in the car. So that's all that matters. The real reason I'm spraying primer on everything again is because I want to see all the shadows. Because this is like a light gray, you can see the shadows of what's doing what really easily versus like just sanding it. You can kind of see all the little details and imperfections, and so you can go in and clear those up. Like for example right here, anything that you think is going to be super noticeable, you can go ahead and take care of that before putting on the liner on. I've already done the liner on here as well because this looked pretty good to me, and so the only sections that I have left are just to touch up this area, that area, and the most important area for me is going to be this 3-gauge pod, because if anything is going to look halfway decent on this dash, it has to be the 3-gauge pod, because this is the item that I've added to the dash. So this has pretty much have to be the best looking part, because I don't want it to look like I added the dash as an afterthought. So I want it to look like this was built into the dash from the very beginning, like it basically was. And so if I do a bad job and just spray over these deep scratches, it's gonna look bad, and it's gonna make me feel like I shouldn't have done it at all. So I'd rather leave the little errors that I've left in here in order to focus more time over here. I don't have a lot of it left, but I did mix up a little bit of the body filler and just kind of did a couple spot checks here and there, just on the most egregious parts, the ones that are going to be the most obvious. This is pretty much going to be the last time I sand it. Then I'm going to prime it just so I can give it a uniform surface. And then finally, we're going to be installing the rest of the top coat. I just stood it up on this stand so I would have better access to everything. Since I'm not going to be doing any more sanding or anything, I'm pretty much done. I gave it one coat and I'm kind of messed up a little bit. So we got a run right there and a run right there. And it's still wet, so normally it wouldn't be reflective, so it's a little reflective. And it's a little cold out, that's probably why it runs. Aside from those, everything else looks pretty good. This is body filler showing through right there, but it might clear up a little bit after it dries. This is what it looks like all the way around. And here's another spot where we had body filler. It says I can recoat it within an hour or after 24 hours. So if after 24 hours I don't quite like the finish, I can go back and I'll spray another coat on it to see what it looks like. This side didn't come out too bad. There are some signs, a little bit of the body filler. Like I said, this is my first time actually restoring the dash, but honestly, it came out a lot straighter than I thought it was going to be. And the 3 gauge pod does not look terrible. So we'll just have to look at this tomorrow. And I'm just gonna leave it like this. I was gonna do a second coat right now, but it's just too cold. I'm hoping at least this one sets up. And if it looks decent, then I'll leave it. If it needs another coat, then we'll go ahead and do that tomorrow. So I'll update you on that right now. It is now the next morning, and I'm checking it out right now. So you can kind of tell where it was running a little bit, but overall not bad. There's a little bit here. I think there was a little bit over here, but really it's a lot less noticeable than I thought it was going to be. Some of the scratches ended up popping up a little bit more than I'd like there, like right over there. But overall, you know, I'm happy with the result. Now it's just a matter of assembling it, but I'd like to clean this up. I had this taped up because I wanted to keep this a regular flat finish, but then I realized that we have some junk here from the fiberglass, from the tape, and so I might go in and hit this with the razor blade just to cut this off, and then just kind of give this a quick spray of flat black paint just so it more or less matches this. And then I've got to sand down the edges a little bit where I had a little bit too much body filler buildup. Now that this texture is pretty much done setting up, this is where normally you would want to stop. The texture's on, it kind of looks like what it needs to look like, but I want to do something else, and that is apply a clear, a flat clear to this, because this texture is a little porous, it's a little raspy, so any kind of dust that comes up, as you can see here, this dust will just kind of just land on here and then not want to leave. So I want to close up some of these pores so that way in the future if the car ever gets dusty, it won't get stuck in here and then I'll have to wipe it down, potentially damaging the coating. So in order to alleviate that and hopefully give it a more flat finish, I'm going to go ahead and spray it down with some clear. I'll be using this one right here. It's a matte clear. Supposedly it works on wood, metal, plastic, and more. And this is pretty much plastic, and it's a Rust-Oleum base. This is a Rust-Oleum clear, so it should work perfectly fine. So I'm gonna give this thing about 1 or 2 coats of this stuff, and hopefully it comes out pretty good. It's starting to look pretty good, but it says that dry time is in an hour, so we'll come back and check on it then. I'm going to be spraying some clear on the plastics as well because, as you can see, we have the natural finish, which looks pretty good. I have no issues with it, but I'm going to have the same problem that I did with the dash texture, that it's just too porous the way it came out of the mold. So instead, we're applying a little bit of clear coat. This will kind of darken up the plastic a little bit, as you can see between the left one and the right one. It'll also give it more of a satin finish instead of a flat black. But because the spray kind of smooths over the edges, the plan is to not struggle so much when it's time to clean it. Plus, I do think they look a little bit better with the clear versus not clear. So I just cleared the first one to test it, and I think it looks great. So I'm gonna do the same thing to the other 3 panels. All right, now it's time for pretty much final assembly. So I've got to find a way to get it back onto the table without absolutely ruining it. All right, so this is the dashboard fully assembled, minus the gauges because I don't have any of the gauges that go on the face. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do have the gauges that go right here in the 3-gauge pod, so I'm gonna go ahead and drop those in. But as for the final product of my dashboard, I mean, here it is. You guys remember that I was struggling with this. You guys remember that I was struggling with that, but it's done. This is what it looks like. This is the final result. I'm dropping the 3 gauges into the 3-gauge pod right now so you guys can check out how that's gonna look like. In the following video series, we're going to be wiring up each of those gauges, so stay tuned for that. So let me know what you guys think about my final product in the comments down below. Again, special thanks to Autometer for all the help in this build. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher, signing out.